witnessed my life's most ironic drama. My name is Eleanor, currently 45 years old, although the exhaustion etched into my soul tells a story of survival spanning much longer than mere decades. I never imagined that a cruel question could shatter my world after 15 long years of silence from the people who once discarded me without mercy. Standing at the hotel entrance, my sister smirked while looking down at my simple clothes because she believed I was still the same broken woman she abandoned. She walked up to me with a voice dripping in venomous pride to ask, "Where is your disabled son, or did he even manage to stay alive?" The tension in the lobby became suffocating until a man with an aura of absolute power stepped through the gold-rimmed doors toward our small, bitter group. Every staff member immediately paused their duties to bow deeply as they greeted him as the chairman of this entire luxury hotel chain. I watched her face drain of color while she stuttered in disbelief, since the person she just insulted was the man everyone was currently honoring. I smiled back at her trembling figure, then replied clearly that the son she just mocked was standing right there in front of her. They thought I was weak, broken, or finished. Yet they remained unaware of the truths I had buried, while they were busy laughing at my struggle. Subscribe. You will not want to miss a single moment of this ultimate justice. 15 years ago, a devastating accident on the Santa Fe highway outskirts took Julian away forever, leaving a deep hole in my heart. The impact was so sudden that I felt the entire gravity of our world shift instantly from a place of light toward an abyss of pure darkness. My husband Julian was the steady pillar of our home, whose laughter used to echo through every corner of our lives until silence became our only companion. This tragic loss meant our economic plus emotional stability vanished within those first few hours because he was the sole provider for our small family. I struggled to breathe through the shock while realizing that the life we had carefully built was crumbling beneath my feet faster than I could grasp it. The hospital bills arrived like a cold winter storm shortly after the funeral, while I was still trying to explain to my young son why his father would never walk through the front door again. My son Leo survived the crash with his life, yet the trauma to his spine resulted in a permanent paralysis that stole the strength from his legs. He sat in that sterile hospital bed, looking small plus fragile, as the doctors delivered the news that he would spend the rest of his existence in a wheelchair. Watching his once energetic spirit fade into a mask of confusion plus physical pain tore at my soul every single hour of the day. We spent months navigating the maze of medical jargon while hoping for a miracle that the insurance companies seemed determined to deny us at every turn. Debt became a heavy chain around my neck as the mounting costs of specialized surgeries plus daily care exceeded any savings we had managed to put aside. Julian had always been meticulous with his business affairs. However, the suddenness of his passing left many loose ends that the creditors were quick to exploit for their own gain. The bank eventually moved to seize our family home, which was the only sanctuary we had ever known together as a complete unit. I watched the men in suits walk through our rooms taking inventory of our memories, while treating our belongings like mere numbers on a balance sheet. Losing that house felt like losing Julian all over again, since every wall held a piece of the history we had created over years of marriage, plus shared dreams. The isolation grew deeper when I witnessed the calculated betrayal of those I previously considered our loyal friends, plus Julian's former business partners. These people had attended our celebrations plus shared our meals for years, yet they vanished the moment they realized our tragedy would not benefit their social standing. My phone remained silent for weeks as I waited for a single word of comfort that never came from the circles we once moved in so freely. They looked the other way when they saw us in the local grocery store because they feared our misfortune might somehow rub off on their comfortable existences. This abandonment taught me a bitter lesson about the fragile nature of human connection when money plus status are no longer part of the equation. Facing total ruin without a single hand extended to help us, I realized I had to swallow every bit of my pride to protect my son's future. My sister Genevieve was the only relative I had left in the world, despite our history of strained communication, plus her obsession with her own high-class image. She lived in an opulent mansion on the other side of the city, while we were being pushed out into the street with nothing but a few boxes of clothes. I felt a profound sense of humiliation at the thought of begging for her mercy because I knew her heart was often as cold as the marble floors of her home. However, the sight of Leo's struggling form plus his need for a stable roof outweighed my personal dignity during those desperate hours of planning our next move. I remember our final night in that empty house while clutching my son, as he cried out in frustration, plus physical agony, within the silence of our bare living room. The echo of his sorrow bounced off the walls that used to be filled with the sound of his running feet before the accident stole his mobility. I held him tightly while whispering that we would find a way through this darkness regardless of the obstacles that stood in our way toward recovery. We were truly alone in that moment with only our shared grief to keep us warm, while the reality of our destitution finally settled over us like a heavy shroud. Tomorrow would be the day I knocked on the door belonging to Genevieve to ask for a place to stay, while we attempted to piece together our broken lives from the dirt. 3 days after the bank seized our home, I pushed Leo's wheelchair toward Genevieve's iron gates with deep humiliation. The upscale neighborhood felt like a different world compared to the cold plus empty apartment we had just been forced to vacate as the Santa Fe wind began to bite through our thin jackets. I looked at the massive stone pillars of my sister's villa while feeling a crushing weight in my chest because asking her for help was the most painful thing I had ever done. Genevieve appeared on the expansive marble porch wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my husband's entire funeral service, while she stared at us with an expression of pure distaste. I swallowed my pride, plus stepped forward to beg my only sibling for the mercy she had never shown me during our years of estrangement. Please, Genevieve, we only need a small corner in the storage room or even the garage, while I search for any employment to keep my son fed, plus sheltered. I whispered through the lump in my throat. I watched her eyes flicker toward Leo's wheelchair with a visible shiver of disgust that made my blood run cold despite the freezing temperature of the afternoon. She adjusted her expensive jewelry while tilting her head with an arrogance that belonged to someone who had never known a day of true hardship in her comfortable existence. My sister took a long sip from her glass of wine before speaking with a voice that was as sharp plus unforgiving as a winter frost over the desert. My house is not a place for defective children plus losers like you, so I refuse to let your presence tarnish my social standing in this city. Genevieve declared, without a single trace of empathy in her cold blue eyes. The words hit me like a physical blow while I looked at Leo, whose small body tensed up at the sound of his aunt's cruel plus calculated rejection. I felt a surge of righteous anger rising within my soul as I realized that she viewed her own nephew as nothing more than an embarrassing defect to be hidden away from the world. Does the blood flowing through our veins mean nothing compared to the hollow vanity you display for your neighbors to admire? I questioned her, while my voice trembled with a mixture of immense sorrow plus growing rage. Instead of answering my plea for basic human decency, Genevieve simply gestured to her hired staff to bring out the 2 worn suitcases we had managed to save from our previous life. I watched in absolute horror as the gardener threw our belongings onto the damp grass near the driveway, just as the gray Santa Fe sky began to release a cold, plus unrelenting rain. The sight of our few remaining clothes soaking into the dirt was the final spark that extinguished any hope I had left for a reconciliation with my family. Leo reached out to grab my hand with a grip that was surprisingly strong for a child who had suffered such a devastating injury during the accident. I looked down into his eyes plus saw a transformation that chilled me to the bone because the fear he once felt had been replaced by a silent, burning vow for retribution. He stared at Genevieve with a gaze so piercing that she momentarily stepped back toward the safety of her shadows before regaining her composure with a smug, victorious smile. My son did not say a word, yet I could feel the intensity of his vow to one day make these people pay for the humiliation they were forcing us to endure. I turned the wheelchair away from the mansion, plus began to push it through the deepening puddles while the cold rain washed the tears from my cheeks. I declared to the darkness that every bond of sisterhood was officially severed between us because I would rather survive in the streets than ever look at her face again. We disappeared into the shadows of the city, while the gates of the villa closed behind us, with a heavy plus final metallic clang that echoed through the empty street. The journey of our lonely survival had officially begun, while I promised my son that we would never be victims of their cruelty ever again. The following months we had to stay in a cheap motel in the poorest part of the city, where the air always smelled of damp mold. This decaying building became our only sanctuary after the world turned its back on us, while I struggled to find any source of income to keep Leo fed, plus cared for. I eventually accepted the most grueling labor available in the city, including cleaning public toilets at a bus station, plus washing piles of greasy dishes at a local diner. Each day started before sunrise as I scrubbed floors until my knees were bruised, since the medical bills for my son's physical therapy left no room for rest. I told a skeptical kitchen manager that I would work as many double shifts as he could provide, because my son's recovery was more important than my own exhaustion. The physical toll was immense, while the constant odor of industrial bleach seemed to seep into my very skin, although I never allowed myself to complain within Leo's earshot. During one of my late shifts at a small fast food joint, I met a kind elderly man named Mr. Harlan who owned the establishment. He noticed the way I hurried home every night with leftovers, plus the determination in my eyes when I asked for extra hours during the weekends. Mr. Harlan eventually offered me a steady position as a lead server, whereas he also provided a small, quiet corner in the back of the shop where Leo could sit with me. This encounter was a turning point for us, because he did not look at my son with the pity or disgust that my sister had shown back at her mansion. Harlan had seen many people struggle throughout his long life in Santa Fe, plus he recognized the burning spark of ambition hidden behind Leo's quiet demeanor. I began to save every extra penny from my tips to buy old used textbooks about business management, along with hotel services from a local thrift store. Since I was away working 16 hours a day, I wanted Leo to have a way to build his mind while his body was still healing from the trauma. I would bring these dusty volumes home, plus we would read them together by the flickering light of our motel room while the rest of the neighborhood slept. These pages are the keys to a kingdom that your Aunt Genevieve thinks we will never be allowed to visit. I told him while turning the pages of a thick book on hospitality luxury. Leo absorbed every word with a hunger that surprised me while he started to map out business structures plus service protocols on the margins of old newspapers. One evening, while Leo was frustrated with his slow progress, Mr. Harlan pulled up a chair next to the boy's wheelchair to offer some wisdom. Don't let the wheelchair define your limits, because intelligence plus perseverance are what truly bring a person to the top of the world, he said while handing Leo a pen to continue his notes. This simple encouragement acted as a catalyst for my son, as he realized that his worth was not tied to his physical mobility, but to the vast potential of his intellect. He started to help Harlan with the inventory, plus the daily accounting for the shop, while demonstrating a natural talent for numbers that far exceeded his young age. The relentless schedule of working long hours left my hands permanently cracked, as well as my back aching from the constant strain of lifting heavy crates. There were nights when I could barely stand up yet. The sight of Leo's progress in both his studies, plus his physical exercises, kept me moving forward. We shared meals of simple bread plus soup while sitting on the edge of the bed, whereas we talked about the grand hotels we would one day see together. The bond between us grew into an invisible armor that protected our spirits from the cold contempt shown by the high society of Santa Fe. We existed in a world of poverty plus struggle, although our dreams were grander than the mansions that had previously cast us out into the street. Leo promised me that one day he would buy me the finest silk dress in the world, so I would never have to wear a stained apron again. Our shared survival in that moldy motel room was the foundation of the empire we were beginning to build within our hearts. 2 years of painstaking struggle passed, while the agonizing efforts of Leo's physical rehabilitation finally began to offer the first rays of hope that made me burst into tears. Mr. Harlan had used his modest savings to purchase a second-hand parallel bar system, plus some heavy-duty resistance bands so my son could practice his movements in the safety of the back room. Leo endured thousands of painful falls that left his knees bruised, as well as his spirit tested beyond anything a teenager should ever experience in a normal life. He would sweat through his thin shirts while gritting his teeth in silent determination because he refused to accept a life confined to the shadows of a wheelchair. One afternoon, the miracle happened when he managed to release his grip on the bars, plus take 3 unstable steps toward me without collapsing onto the cold floor. I felt my heart swell with an overwhelming mixture of grief for what he lost along with absolute joy for the future he was reclaiming with every shaky movement. While his body was healing, his mind was already operating on a level that left most experienced businessmen in Santa Fe feeling completely outclassed. Leo took over the management of Mr. Harlan's small eatery while introducing a digital inventory tracking system that eliminated waste plus tripled our monthly profit margins within a single season. He restructured the food supply chain by negotiating directly with local farmers, whereas he also created a loyalty program that kept our tables filled throughout the entire week. Mr. Harlan watched in amazement as his humble shop transformed into a thriving business model that other local entrepreneurs started to study with intense curiosity. It was clear that my son possessed a rare gift for identifying market inefficiencies, along with the courage to implement radical solutions that actually worked. I sat with him one evening after we finished our accounting work while looking at the progress he had made in both his physical plus intellectual journey. "You have done what doctors said was impossible while surviving the cruelty that Genevieve threw at us, so now it is finally time for us to take back what we lost," I said, while placing a supportive hand on his shoulder. Leo looked at me with a gaze that had matured far beyond his actual years, while he promised that the world would soon know our name for reasons other than our past tragedy. "I am not just building a hotel chain, but I am building a legacy that will ensure no one ever treats us like garbage again," he replied with a cold plus focused intensity in his voice. The decision to launch our own hospitality startup created a significant ripple effect within the young investor circles across New Mexico because no one knew the identity of the mysterious genius behind the project. We operated under a shell company to protect our privacy, while Leo designed a boutique hotel concept that combined traditional Santa Fe aesthetics with modern technological efficiency. The rapid growth of our corporation was fueled by my practical advice regarding guest service, plus Leo's aggressive expansion strategies that left our competitors scrambling to keep up. We moved out of the moldy motel into a modest apartment, while eventually securing a luxury residence as our portfolio of properties began to dominate the local market. My son became a visionary leader who treated every employee with the dignity that we were once denied, while he simultaneously built a financial wall that was impenetrable to our enemies. Leo officially entered the ranks of the most powerful businessmen in the state, while maintaining a low profile so that his personal history remained a closely guarded secret. He became a ghost in the industry whose influence was felt in every major real estate transaction, although his face was rarely seen in the gossip columns or social events. We were no longer the destitute survivors begging for scraps, but we were the architects of a multi-million-dollar empire that was quietly preparing for the ultimate confrontation. The secrecy was strategic since we wanted our eventual appearance at the hotel to be the final blow against those who had celebrated our downfall. Our life was now defined by luxury plus influence, yet the memories of the cold rain at the gate of Genevieve remained the primary fuel for our relentless pursuit of total victory. We spent those years perfecting our craft while waiting for the perfect moment to return to the world that had tried to bury us. That day in the lobby of La Fonda Hotel, I never expected to accidentally run into Genevieve after so many years of complete silence. I was standing near the grand entrance while reviewing a stack of sensitive event files when the scent of an expensive perfume announced a presence that I had tried to forget for over a decade. Genevieve walked toward me with a flashy appearance that screamed of old wealth plus desperate vanity as she adjusted her designer sunglasses to get a better look at my professional attire. She immediately began to unleash a stream of mockery regarding my past poverty, since she assumed that I was still the same destitute woman she had discarded on that rainy night long ago. My sister laughed while glancing at my clipboard, then remarked with a voice dripping in venom that some people are simply born to serve, whereas others are destined to rule the elite circles of Santa Fe. Do you still have that little broken boy? Or did the weight of poverty finally finish both of you off years ago? Genevieve asked, with a voice as cold as the marble tiles beneath our feet. I felt a surge of ancient anger rising within my chest, although I chose to maintain a mask of absolute silence, because I knew that the truth would soon speak louder than any insult she could throw. She took great pride in explaining that her own daughter was now holding a senior management position at this prestigious five-star hotel, which was supposedly the most respected establishment in the entire region. My sister seemed intoxicated by her own boasting while she claimed that her family had reached a level of success that someone like me could never even comprehend in 1,000 lifetimes. In the heat of her arrogant celebration, Genevieve immediately called her daughter Skylar out to the main lobby so she could witness the pathetic failure of the aunt who had once begged for mercy at their gates. My niece Skylar appeared from the back offices wearing a crisp, tailored suit along with a badge that declared her authority over the entire floor, while her face twisted into a sneer of pure Hong Hach. She did not even recognize me as a relative, but instead viewed me as an intruder who was somehow diminishing the luxury atmosphere they worked so hard to maintain for their wealthy guests. Skylar stepped forward with an air of unearned importance, then ordered the nearby security guards to remove me from the building because she believed my presence was polluting the refined space. Security, please remove this woman immediately because her presence is an insult to the luxury we provide here, and she is clearly lost. Skylar shouted while gesturing for the guards to surround me. I looked directly into their eyes with a terrifying calmness that seemed to momentarily freeze the air between us as I gripped my documents with a steady hand. I realized that they were still the same small plus cruel people they had always been despite the expensive clothes, plus the titles they used to hide their hollow souls from the world. I am only standing here to wait for the most important person in my life, so you have no right to evict me from this lobby. I stated with a calmness that seemed to unnerve them more than any loud protest would have done. The commotion began to attract the attention of numerous high society guests who were checking in for the evening gala as they whispered among themselves about the unprofessional behavior of the hotel management. This public scrutiny only made Skylar more furious since her ego could not handle any challenge to her authority in front of the people she was trying so hard to impress. She began to scream at the guards to use force if necessary to throw me out onto the street because she wanted to prove to her mother that she possessed the power to crush anyone who stood in their way. I stood my ground while watching the heavy glass doors of the entrance since I knew that the shadow appearing on the horizon was about to change their lives forever. Just as the rough hands of the security guards were about to touch me, a deep but powerful voice rang out, shaking the great hall. Leo walked into the lobby with the regal presence of a monarch, while every single employee from the front desk to the concierge immediately dropped their tasks to bow in unison. The atmosphere of the La Fonda Hotel shifted instantly as the weight of his authority filled the air while Genevieve plus Skylar stood frozen in absolute bewilderment at the sight of the man they were supposed to be honoring. I watched my son move with a steady plus confident stride that carried no trace of the weakness they had once celebrated with such cruelty during our darkest hours. The silence in the lobby was deafening as the high society guests realized that the legendary chairman who had remained a mystery for years was finally standing among them. Skylar began to tremble so violently that the clipboard she held fell to the marble floor with a loud clatter, while she turned toward her mother with a face as white as a sheet of paper. She began to stutter as she whispered that this was the very man who had recently finalized the acquisition of their entire luxury resort group, plus held the power to decide her future with a single word. Genevieve's arrogant smile vanished as she looked between the powerful man approaching us, plus the woman she had just tried to have thrown out like common trash. They looked like statues of salt as they realized the magnitude of their mistake, along with the reality that their world of fake importance was about to be obliterated by the truth. Leo stepped past the stunned security guards to pull me into a protective plus warm embrace, while he looked directly into the eyes of the ant who had once discarded our few belongings onto the wet grass. He held me tightly for a moment before turning his focused gaze toward Genevieve to deliver a response that cut through the air like a sharpened blade. You just asked if my mother's disabled son was still alive, whereas I am standing right here in front of you to provide the answer you so desperately wanted to hear, he stated with a voice that echoed with the strength of 15 years of survival. My sister's mouth opened, plus closed without a sound, because the shock of seeing her nephew as a billionaire was more than her fragile ego could process. I stood beside my son while looking at the crowd of influential guests who were now watching the scene with intense fascination, plus realization of the family drama unfolding before them. This is my son Leo, the same nephew you heartlessly threw onto the street when he was just a child who needed your compassion more than anything else in the world. I declared with a voice that carried the weight of every tear I had ever shed for him. I wanted every person in that lobby to know the true character of the woman they had admired as a social leader, while she had secretly abandoned her own blood in a time of desperate need. The shame that Genevieve had tried to pin on us for years finally returned to her in a tidal wave of public exposure, plus absolute disgrace. The sheer force of the truth caused Genevieve to collapse onto her knees on the cold floor, while Skylar stood beside her, looking absolutely paralyzed by the sudden destruction of her career, plus her social standing. My niece realized that her arrogant behavior toward the woman she thought was a stranger had just sealed her fate within the industry she had worked so hard to dominate. Their facade of high-class dignity crumbled into dust before the light of actual success, plus the undeniable evidence of our triumph over their small-minded malice. There was no more room for lies or boasting in this moment because the balance of power had shifted permanently in our favor as justice finally took its place at the center of the room. The entire lobby remained in a state of shock as we stood there, as the victors of a long plus painful war that they had started on a rainy afternoon 15 years ago. We were no longer the victims of their cruelty, but we were the masters of their destiny while they were forced to face the ugly reality of their own souls. The high ceilings of the hotel seemed to capture the magnitude of our victory, while the whispers of the guests served as a choir for our long-awaited redemption. Every struggle we endured in those moldy motel rooms, along with every hour of manual labor I performed, was validated by the sight of our enemies falling at our feet. The silence that followed my declaration was not a silence of fear, but a silence of profound realization that the people they tried to bury had instead become the foundation of a new empire. Skylar's eyes darted around the room, searching for a way to escape the judgment of her peers, yet there was nowhere to hide from the cold reality of her actions. Her mother reached out a trembling hand as if to touch the hem of Leo's expensive suit, while her pride was replaced by a desperate need for a forgiveness that would never come. We looked down at them without a shred of pity, because the mercy they were now begging for was the same mercy they had denied a paralyzed child, plus a grieving widow. The true nature of their wealth was exposed as a hollow shell that offered no protection against the weight of their past transgressions against their own kin. This was the moment where the echoes of our suffering finally met the silence of their defeat within the grandest stage we could have ever imagined. As the sunset fell over the terracotta rooftops of Santa Fe, I knew the old chapter of my life had officially closed forever. Orange plus purple hues of the New Mexico sky reflected the fire that finally burned away the remnants of my past suffering. Leo did not wait for the crowd to disperse before issuing a formal directive for Skylar's immediate termination for cause. He cited a gross violation of corporate ethics, along with a blatant display of discriminatory behavior that made her presence within the organization a significant liability. In the competitive landscape of the American hospitality industry, such a mark on a professional record is essentially a career death sentence because no high-end hotel chain would ever risk their reputation on an employee with a history of prejudice. Skylar watched her digital access being revoked in real time, while the realization of her permanent unemployment settled over her like a heavy plus suffocating shroud. Genevieve scrambled toward me while reaching out a trembling hand to clutch the fabric of my coat as if her desperation could mend 15 years of calculated cruelty. She begged me through frantic sobs to intercede with Leo for her daughter's sake because she knew that without this income, they would lose their standing. I looked down at her with a steady gaze that held no traces of anger or pity, since the person who used to love her had died on that rainy porch long ago. I simply removed her hand from my sleeve with a firm plus cold motion, whereas I stepped back to maintain the distance I had worked so hard to create. I walked toward the elevator without offering a single word of comfort because some wounds are too deep to be healed by a few moments of desperate regret. The practical consequences of their actions began to unfold with a ruthless efficiency that left no room for escape for Genevieve or her daughter. Skylar was officially blacklisted from every hospitality group in the United States, while her name became synonymous with the scandal at La Fonda. Without her status, Genevieve was forced into a foreclosure process that stripped away her remaining dignity, while she moved into a cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city. Their lives became a cycle of bitter arguments while they were haunted by the memory of the child they had tried to destroy. We moved forward with our lives while ensuring that every single property in our portfolio operated with the integrity plus respect that we once craved during our years of destitution. Before we conclude today's story, do not hurry away just yet, because the journey of Eleanor plus Leo carries a profound lesson for all of us. As the owner plus sacrifice rather than mere biological connections that lack true empathy. Eleanor's choice to refuse a superficial apology demonstrates that we are not obligated to forgive those who intentionally sought our destruction, simply because they share our bloodline. True healing often requires us to burn the bridges that lead back to toxicity while we build a new life founded on self-respect, plus the pursuit of excellence. I want to ask you a question today about the final choice made by our main character. If you were in Eleanor's position, would you have offered Genevieve a second chance, or would you have walked away with the same cold finality that she once showed you? Please share your thoughts in the comments below while supporting our mission to tell